Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our session today. We'll give it a few minutes for a few minutes for others to join in, and then we get started in our conversation today. Just a reminder: we are live on LinkedIn, we are live on YouTube, and we are live on Twitter X as well. The Twitter handle on the Twitter handle is at ESSA_Kenya. On LinkedIn, it's Electricity Sector Association of Kenya. And on YouTube, it's the Electricity Sector Association of Kenya. Thank you for those who are joining us. Karibuni sana. Keep joining, keep joining. Today we have an interesting panel. Of course, I always say that we always have an interesting panel in every session. It is our mandate at ESSAC to ensure that we give you the best in the sector, and today is no different. So we appreciate you joining today. Today's topic is quite hefty. 136 page document. I don't know if we will be able to hack it in 1.5 hours, but we have the experts here. They will guide us, and we'll see where the conversation takes us. Thank you. I can see guys are joining in. Asante sana. They're eager to learn. So no pressure to our panelists. No pressure, Engineer Kihara. No pressure at all. But we appreciate you. Once again, this is a ESSAC knowledge sharing series. We do this monthly with the end goal being to demystify the sector and break down sectoral issues into to bits that people can understand, not just the sector experts, but as well as the mwananchi wa kawaida. So we keep our conversations technical, simple, and easy for all consumers. So we are one-stop shop when it comes to knowledge. We are one-stop shop when it comes to sector demystifying. So asanteni sana. Won't take much of a time, but as you can see from the background, we want to announce that you've probably seen on our socials, we've been running a campaign. We have this C&I conference, ESSAC C&I conference and exhibition coming up in April, just before Easter. That week of Easter, we have your plan, 2 days, you're with us, and then you kick off the Easter with your family. So look out on our socials for more details, for more information on that, and we'll keep it here. I want to hand over the session to our moderator for today, who will take it from here and introduce the panelists. ESSAC CEO George Aluru. Over to you.
Good evening.
It's here.
Good evening.
I want to hand over the session to our moderator for today.
I hope you can now hear me well. My name is George Aluru, the CEO of the Electricity Sector Association Kenya. Karibuni sana again for another round of our ESSAC knowledge sharing series. And today we are going to have a discussion around the draft national energy policy that's supposed to kind of guide the thinking of the energy sector for the next 10 years. It's a document drafted under the auspices of the Ministry of Energy. And as I said, it covers quite a lot of topics. To be specific, within the document, we have about 36 focus areas or what they call policy statements. I won't go much. It's not my job to actually give you a brief of the policy. We with us today, Engineer Mungai Kihara, the Deputy Director for Renewable Energy at EPRA, who will take us through a presentation. For now, I would want to welcome Engineer Kihara to introduce yourself and then just take us through a about 15-minute presentation. Then we'll go back to the other panelists and have a panel discussion. So, Engineer, karibu sana, you may take the floor.
Thank you very much, George, and thank you very much, Asak, for hosting us today. We have a discussion on energy policy. It's work that we've been doing for, let me say, quite some time now, about 1.5 years internally. But it's not really work for the Ministry of Energy or energy sector alone. It's for all of us in the public sector. And also the public in general, that's what I mean. So I'll try to take you through the slides on what we have prepared. And just to note that I focus my presentation on a very high level on electricity because that's the main focus for today of what ESSAC does. The policy is quite big, as you have mentioned, but I'll try to go through the draft policy. And also to note, George, because I'm here, is also to let the public know from next week, we'll be all over the country in 7 regions to present this to the public and give us comments. At the same time, I also request, please, if you can share any comment that you have here or in writing directed to the ministry, so that now we can be able to incorporate your comments in the policy. It's still called a draft policy. That means it's still work in progress. So I'll start with a background and. Just to say where we started, this is work we started in 2023, August, and this is a mandate of Energy Act that each and every 5 years we need to look at our policy and see what can we do, what can we develop or revise and see we'll do better on what has been there. And the Principal Secretary, Minister of Energy, established a committee, one committee, but that committee also came up with several committees depending on thematic areas, starting with electricity, energy efficiency. There was some people working in geothermal, finance and electricity pricing, taxes and levies. There's a group of working on that. Another key area, George, that is really important is on demand stimulation. So we had a look at that. We had a group working on green hydrogen, energy planning and evolution. That's very important because the Act also talks about integrated national energy plan. There's issues of land, environment, gender, and safety, which is very important. And of course, the issue of capacity building and innovation. There's a group working on that. So this group was mainly borrowed from our sector agencies, but at the same time, sometimes when we were working, we brought on board some experts to help us draft what we have today, so that we can be able to share. So on the introduction, and I've divided to try to divide this work, and I said at a high level, we had the rationale of why we are reviewing this. One of the things that's very key, and there's quite a lot of pronouncement on this, is reducing our reliance on imported fossil fuels. We'll see what we're looking at in the Act. We're also trying to ensure we have energy security in the country. And then energy, is an enabler for economic development. So as it relates to socio-economic development is also very key for us. And of course, environmental safety. So this was the whole rationale, and justification for this was to address the various energy sector challenges that we have had, and also the emerging issues that have come on board. On introduction, now, George, looking at in the program, we have the policy objectives. The main objective is provide affordable, reliable, and competitive and sustainable energy to support national development, and of course, what has been going on all over the world, just transition. Remember, there are some people now working, for example, in the petroleum industry, and we are looking at positioning people to use more EVs. So we make sure it's not just a transition, but a just transition. There was specific objectives, which are, of course, first of all, very important for us is promotion of renewable energy. It's really key for us. There's universal access to electricity, of course, energy efficient conservation. We usually say it's easier to conserve and be efficient on how we use our energy than building a totally new power plant. It'd be cheaper to conserve than building a power plant. This issue of funding of our projects, and then promoting. The issue of pricing these are specific objectives that we have, and capacity building. I've mentioned on these, promotion of local contact and regional trade, supporting industrialization and developing modern and modern infrastructure. All these are geared for are taken from electricity, energy efficiency, clean cooking. You are aware we want to get universal clean cooking by 2028. There's the issue of energy, diversifying our energy sources, and you are aware we moved from hydros. Now we are having geothermal as our base load. There's also enabling frameworks. This is very key, especially for government, so that we can attract more and more private sector invest in the energy sector. There's energy, of course, I've talked about energy financing and also energy planning. And there's some guiding principles like governance and transparency. People want to know how things are done. The issues of sustainability as the guiding principles, economic development, I've mentioned these, and also the issue of energy equity. Now, on the main highlights of the policy, I'll start with power generation and go to transmission, and also talk a little bit about demand stimulation. We are starting with hydros, and we are more focused and a little bit biased in this policy because we are more of renewable energy. And we're starting with hydros, and we want to strengthen our interagency collaboration, noting that we have built our dams as multi-purpose dams. So we need to bring together Ministry of Water, Ministry of Agriculture, and Energy to work together as we build these dams, which sometimes they are very expensive. Then how do all these agencies work together to make sure electricity is not really expensive to final consumers? And then we are talking about providing adequate resources and mechanisms. And when we talk about mechanisms here, we're talking about bringing also private sector to invest in hydropower plants. I know we have done quite a lot of small hydros, but also like Hygrad Force, we are trying to bring PPP, both on water and energy. So these are the mechanisms that we are trying to work on. On geothermal, the most important thing here is to work on our national geothermal strategy. How do we develop the resources that we have? Currently, we are talking about 10,000 megawatts that is available to us as a potential. But how best can we develop this? Bring on board an innovative financing mechanism, PPP structure, and such. Sorry, George. George, may I have a presentation, please? Sorry, George. Not that one. I'm sorry, guys, for just some technical hitch here. We'll be able to continue in a few. Just change the presentation. Thank you very much, George. Just one slide back. I want to speak on variable renewable energy. Just one back that. As George highlighted there. Thank you very much, George. So on variable renewable energy, and here we are looking at both wind and solar power plants. And this is very key. We want to finalize on the renewable energy policy. It's really important. Renewable energy auction policy. We have developed this. We want just finalize on this. And we also want to establish a central data management repository for VREs, so that now any investor now comes on board can be able to get the data that is necessary to make an investment decision. Although he may need to validate this data, but at least this is the starting point. And also develop mechanisms to support integration of wind and solar. In this case, we are looking at working with the system operator to make sure he's well equipped with the various forecasting mechanisms to be able to integrate more and more renewable energy. Now, moving on to thermal power plants. In the next slide, we see that government want to prioritize the development of renewable energy resources, as I mentioned earlier, moving away from the thermals, and of course try to minimize the dispatch of thermal power plants, especially for, and also hybridize off-grid areas. As you are aware, most of our off-grid areas, they are powered using thermal diesel generators. There's also a shift now from heavy fuel, especially for the power plants that we currently have. We were trying to see whether we can move them to a cleaner source of energy, and that's LNG. And this is something that is we have done a study on, and it's very much possible to do that. And in future, as a transition fuel, then we develop more LNG power plants, especially that helps us in system flexibility. That's one, and also help us to integrate more renewable energy. So LNG power plants for peaking, they are very, very good. On nuclear power, one thing that is really important, and government is very keen on this, Ministry of Energy is very keen on this, is public awareness, so that now the public is aware what is the safety and benefits of nuclear energy. George and I mentioned that nuclear as a technology is something that we have been using, especially in hospitals. And now we are trying to see whether they can be able to use this for power generation. And also we are trying to see whether they can be able to leverage on the latest technologies like modular power plants. This is something that has been done in China and the US, and especially for small grids and Kenya, it's something that we try to see whether they can be able to integrate that. And then government will continue sustaining its strategy, and especially legal and regulatory frameworks that are very important for International Atomic Energy Agency. They are very keen on how we have our legal and regulatory framework, especially for safety, and make sure this nuclear energy is not used for any other use, especially in security matters. Now, moving on transmission, this is also very key to make sure we move our energy from generation through transmission system to our people. And government will continue expanding and strengthening them and modernize the transmission network. This will be done through public resources, bringing on board PPP structure, and also trying to see how else innovative funding, how else you can be able to fund this. And one of the things that has come out is that, and we talk to this when it comes to pricing, is that we can try to monetize the current assets that we currently have. And then there's a need to mobilize adequate funding. I've mentioned that. And there's also categorizing transmission infrastructure as critical assets. You are aware that I think in 2023, we had vandalism of transmission network, and we had a national blackout. So this is very important. Make sure the transmission systems are well guarded and security is there for them. And then we we have worked on this to some extent, formulate open access and bulk supply regulations to make sure people can be able to use the transmission network, like roads, where we're able to move energy from one end to the other. On distribution, we are looking at modernizing and expanding electricity distribution infrastructure to minimize power losses, increase reliability. Also looking at currently what we call advanced metering infrastructure that will improve operation efficiency, so that people not really complain that we are not able to give them the enough power. Then we are looking at facilitating open access to the distribution network. And the last one is sustainable ownership on operation and maintenance of modalities for rural electrification assets. Yes, we are currently, there's some assets that are owned by REREC and some are owned by Kenya Power. And the government also chips in this, some of these assets. So the need of quite a good demarcation on how these assets are owned and how they are operated and how the revenues are given for the operations. And then on electricity access, government is looking at developing a least cost electricity strategy, looking at grid extension, grid desertification, what else, and mini grids and solar home systems, and also looking at modernizing as in distribution, of course, modernizing infrastructure and investing more in renewable energy, especially for mini grids. Still on electricity transmission, distribution, electricity access, we are looking at electricity retail. This is something that has been given on by the Act. It's also facilitate development of green projects that support direct retailing. In this case, we are looking, for example, some of the green hydrogen projects want to do captive power plants. That means they build their own power plants to use for the other uses. So something that we want to continue facilitating, implement frameworks to facilitate competition and retail electricity, and then pursue energy bulk supply agreements with the national off-taker for downstream retailing by private sector. In this case, we are like Tatu City, where they buy electricity from Kenya Power and distribute to their own consumers in their locality. On system operations, we are looking at establishing reliability services market to regulate system and control intermittency. As we are, George, there's the issue of intermittency in the power system is very key, and sometimes it brings a lot of instability. So we are looking at how we can establish like a market for ancillary services. And then there's an issue of facilitating and strengthening the transition grid net infrastructure, and looking at the congestion and such, and also training and building capacity for system controllers, system engineers, to be able to operate a system with a higher shares of variable renewable energy. On power market, we're developing, of course, a framework to transition to competitive market. That's the key. And what we are working on open access bulk supply and electricity market is one of them. And below that, we shall be able to develop some guidelines on how this works out and how this is supposed to, how long this is supposed to take. And then we develop a framework for wholesale retail electricity market to enable bulk supply. We've talked about that. And also collaborate on East Africa power pool and regional power market design. Sometimes you don't really need to invent the wheel. You can be able to learn what has been done by East Africa power pool and also South Africa power pool, and also be able to implement as a country. Another key area that's very important, and especially for private sector, is on captive power and net metering. Of course, we have gazetted net metering regulations, but we also want to establish some guidelines on how we integrate these captive power plants for safe operations, and then develop a mechanism for ancillary services, especially where these captive power plants they are depending on the national grid for ancillary services. We find a way of how they're able to compensate each other, and then develop our technical standards so that we are on the same page for both the off-taker and the captive power plants. On energy storage systems, of course, currently energy storage systems, when we look at battery storage, for example, are quite expensive. So currently the government is looking at innovative funding models that can be able to finance the capital cost that goes with the energy storage systems. And then, and this is very key, the regulatory framework is very important so that we can be able to bring private sector in the third bullet there. The regulations and the regulatory framework is very key to give certainty to the private sector, because we want the private sector also to participate, not only in generation, but also providing energy storage systems. Not that just embedded to the power stations like solar systems, but also embedded the grid system. And this can be able to provide ancillary services. And now talking about reliability and services, what we call reliability services, we are also working on a regulatory framework to how to onboard these. As we speak now, there's a study going on by EPRA to see how what things to be brought on board to bring private sector to be able to provide these services. And then we want to collaborate with other countries, knowing that now we are connected to Uganda, we are connected to Tanzania on our AC, that means our system are synchronized. Then we need to find a way how we collaborate. What happens in Uganda can really affect our power system, the same way our power system can be able to affect Uganda and Tanzania. So that collaboration of the regional countries is really important. And then find a way of establishing finance and cooperation, and give incentives, especially for development of ancillary services, battery storage, what we call hydro projects that can be able to support on giving ancillary services. On demand side management, two areas here are very key. Demand stimulation. This is very important. As we grow our generation side, then we really need to grow our demand side. This also helps us to lower the cost. The more we are able to sell, that means our cost on really can be able to manage the cost very well. So one of the key area is the review of the time of use tariff to bring on board more consumers who can be able to benefit from this. This allows this consumer to demand more electricity when you have low demand. Unfortunately, when you have low demand, at the same time that you have a lot of wind blowing in. So if we're able to do this, then we cannot reinvent more geothermal steam. Then, of course, the electricity market, bulk supply, and open access regulations will really help us to grow the demand. That's really good to keep our prices low, and also invest in grid infrastructure that modernizes and increases stability and reliability. Some areas like in Western Kenya, for example, are areas that we are yet to really do very well because the infrastructure there is not really good. Some constraints in that area, we are not able to reach more people with our electricity. So when you modernize and grow the infrastructure, the grid infrastructure there, we'll be able to have more demand coming from Western Kenya. On energy efficiency and conservation, and I had mentioned this, that when you're able to save from megawatts, it means the same megawatts will not really need to build. So these are very important areas that the government is keen on, and we want to enhance coordination and resource mobilization for energy efficiency programs. The Ministry of Energy has worked quite for a long time with the CAM on this area. and they want to continue with that collaboration and bring more on board to have more energy efficiency programs. Then there's the issue of promotion and adoption of electric vehicles. I mentioned this, and I mentioned about just transition. Then it means that we are bringing more renewable energy to the areas that we have not been able to use electricity, as EV is one of them, and becoming more and more efficient in how we use our energy. Now moving to energy financing, pricing and procurement, and starting energy financing and pricing. The key point here is innovative financing, not the traditional way of doing how we do financing. And we are looking, for example, what we call blended financing, bring both government and what we call public financing and private financing, and especially public financing helping us to de-risk the areas that are quite risky. And a good example is in geothermal resource, where government has put a lot of resources in drilling and exploration, and make it a little bit less risky to bring private sector later on. Then there's a consolidated energy fund. This is one of the funds that is provided for by the Energy Act. And what we have done at EPRA is come up with the regulations. And these regulations will help us operationalize the fund and allocate and work with the national president to allocate adequate resources for both national and county level. And then we are also looking at the physical incentives such as tax exemptions for those people who are already in solar business. They are aware that solar equipment are totally tax exempted, and also those who are in power generation are aware power generation equipment is also exempted of VAT and what called VAT and custom duty when bring them to the country. On power procurement, we want also to finalize on what we call procurement guidelines, especially because the issue of transparency is really important, and accountability. And this will help us to attract more investments in the energy sector. And there's also the collaboration between sectors and agencies to foster development of increased capacity. And I had mentioned about how we are working with the water, working with agriculture and others, so that we have this collaboration. But the most important thing is to bring private sector because there's a lot of resources in the private sector. This collaboration will be very key, and when doing power procurement. On energy planning, I'm almost finishing here. On energy planning, we are talking about integrated energy plan. The Act mandates the minister to develop integrated energy plan, which brings the plans from both national and county levels together. And currently, the minister is developing a framework on integrated energy planning to make sure this work is done in a smooth and in a systematic manner. It's not easy to bring 47 energy plans into one national energy plan. So that framework is really important in establishing the two levels of governance at national and county levels. The other issue is the mechanism of how we follow up on implementation, monitoring, evaluation of these plans. It's not a matter of just providing a plan and it's there on the shelf, but also make sure we follow up on its implementation. So monitoring evaluation is also very key, and we have done on this policy. We also provide for implementation framework. The other one is, and this is very important, to hold regular stakeholder engagement to foster a shared understanding. We have had a way where KEPSA is able to meet with the government and share with the government what they think the government should be doing. And also the issue of Minister of Energy now sharing the plans that they have with the private sector. I think this also brings a lot of transparency, and that's what we are looking at in energy plan, integrated national energy plan. And on the energy plan, the last one is bringing on board the geospatial tools. And the spatial planning is very important to know where we have our power plant, where we pass our transmission network, and where our customers are. It really helps us now to do quite accurate planning for energy. On energy security, we want to facilitate public and private investment across the value chain from all over. We have talked about from generation, transmission, all the way to distribution and retailing, and provide adequate firm capacity to maintain international accepted generation capacity reserve. Our own reserve is very important. Of course, the issue of geopolitics can come in play where you're importing a lot of energy. So when you have able to maintain your own reserve is very key in our case. And then provide adequate strategy for a national energy independence. Just in case we are not very good with anyone, only of the country, then we're able to provide our own energy. So I'll stop there, George. Just a highlight of what we have in the policy. I've left out some other areas like land, what we are doing on land. I've also left out areas of capacity building and such, so that we focus on electricity, and so that we can also have a conversation on these key areas on electricity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kihara. I think you've done quite some justice. As you said, it's a really wide document, and you've tried your best to cover at least the items that are very relevant for the electricity side. I encourage, and I know we had shared a copy of this document on our social media pages, and I know a lot of us have already also downloaded and read, and probably are already starting to give feedback directly to the ministry on this draft. In the next phase now, we want to go into a discussion, and we are honored to have 3 panelists, addition to Engineer Kihara, who have taken time to come and discuss with us. And I would like to start by asking them to just give a brief introduction of themselves. And as you're doing your introduction, just give me, from your view, from your reading of the policy, draft policy, what is one positive aspect? Well, give me one really positive aspect about the draft policy. And I will start with Nkatha Mondi. Nkatha, please introduce yourself.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nkatha Mondi. I'm an energy lawyer. I'm a partner at A&N Legal Advocates, and I specialize in renewable energy, climate change law, and project finance. I have over 15 years experience in this sector, and I've had the privilege of working at the Geothermal Development Company and 2 Tier 1 law firms. I have provided legal advice for 11 projects in Kenya, and I was also part of the consortium that advised the World Bank and the government of Kenya on the renewable energy auction policy in 2020. Today, I'm looking forward to a robust discussion on the draft energy policy with my fellow panelists, and engaging the audience today on this policy and in future. As regards the positive aspects of this policy, I think it's a very timely document. Since our last policy was in 2018, and there's been a lot of changes since then. We've seen in Kenya firsthand the adverse effect of climate change on our energy security. We saw what the drought did to our hydro. And then we've seen the emergence of new technologies, green hydrogen, energy storage solutions, cheaper technologies in solar panels, as well as shifts in our diplomacy policy. So I'm very grateful that this policy has come out now. I think this is the best time for it. And also it moves to reduce, barriers to entry, which have been there for IPPs in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Nkatha. Asante sana. Next, we'll have Sam Mwangi.
Thank you, George. My name is Samuel Mwangi. I'm a development director at Tanzania Electric Group. Here we do private sector player in the energy sector. We develop power projects, largely small hydro, as well as power distribution and retail. in terms of what I find to be, so there are quite a number of positive things in this document. One of them is this, the provisions or wholesale market. And there's quite a bit on that, because then it has a lot of implications. And because I'm quite focused on the small hydro space, maybe one other one to say, which we see throughout the document, is this aspect of reducing the bottlenecks that make it difficult to develop our projects. So there's the aspect that Kiara has highlighted about an interagency collaboration on that aspect, which I think every document that we've received, every policy statement that we've seen in the last few years point to the need for this, a way to reduce the bottlenecks that make projects take very long in the development cycle. So that is one very positive thing I see in the document. I don't know, Kiara, I don't know why it was the budget is zero for that, but we'll hopefully there's a good explanation for that.
I see some you've already started with the questions directed at Engineer Kiara. I think we can hold our horses a bit. So Bernard Osawa, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Penina. Thank you, Asak, and all the attendees. I think this is a good engagement. My name is Bernard Osawa. I work at Frontier Energy, which is a private equity and project development fund that develops and invests in renewable energy power projects across sub-Saharan Africa. I've been in this sector for about 30 years now. At one point, I was a regulator. I worked in government with the ministry for some time while I was the regulator. And for the last 13 years as a developer and investor. It's interesting. I mean, we've been there from the Energy Act 2006 to now, and the evolution 2004 and to now, and the evolution has been very interesting. One or two good things about this policy document is, one, it's taken into consideration and in depth all the energy resources or sectors from either biomass to petroleum to all that. It's taken into account all that, and the evolution into clean cooking and all that. That's good. Specifically for the power sector, it's taken into account, again, the evolution of the power sector now from open access to C&I, the mainstream IPP structure. It's taken into account most of that, though we will discuss a bit more. Has it been done in the best way? I'm not sure, but that's for the debate. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bernard. And audience, as you can see, there's quite a bit of passion to try and get to the bottom of this. Kiara, since Sam has already kind of started the questioning, I will pick from his question on the implementation table. As he mentioned, perhaps it's just a slight error, but on the hydro side, there's no budget allocated to it. But that's not really my question. My question is more, again, where your heart is, basically is where the money goes. So if you look at the implementation table, we find that there are some top 5 areas that the money is going to: transmission, cybersecurity, and AI, green hydrogen, system operation. These ones take the bulk of what is proposed as funding to go to the energy sector. And at the bottom, we have captive power, gender and diversity, productive uses of energy, and also power procurement itself, the process of improving power procurement. The For the last, I would say, 5 years, we've had a lot of complaints around the cost of power, and just thinking as a layman, wouldn't it also have made sense, or does it make sense to have like a specific line dedicated to reduction of the cost of power? Because we've seen quite a lot of complaints, especially from the manufacturing side and also from regular Kenyans around cost. And just my question is, what is the thought to allocate some sort of thinking or money towards this? And do you see the way we've prioritized and the way we are planning, at least in the draft stage, to allocate funds being aligned with where we want to go?
Thank you, George, and thank you, Sam, for highlighting that. Number one, I may say on the implementation table, the costs that we have put there are quite high level cost, and they are quite estimates. We are yet to validate that, so we'll be coming back, and especially now that you highlighted that, it's one of the comments that we are taking in to look at the costs that we have put there and validate them to make sure we allocate the resources adequately and in an efficient manner. So we'll be looking at it again because of course there's no way we will give Hydro zero. It has been our base route for a long time before we moved to Jalamo. So there's some most like some errors that we really need to check out on that. And thank you very much for highlighting that. Now moving to the other one on cost of power and reducing the cost of power. I think I'm a one who will be accused here for removing the word cost reducing cost, because I usually say even the cost of bread doesn't really come down. The issue of inflation and other things will come in. And the most important thing as government, what the minister made me need to focus, and all of us who work in government need to focus on, is making this power affordable. So the issue here is affordability. It's making you, George, be able to afford the cost we have for power. And I remember in Machakos, and I was totally agreeing on that. So there's two ways of it. We can reduce the cost. We can try to see what is it in our cost. For example, look at the levies and others that the government has control over and reduce that. And then also look at the other side of it and look at how do we make the populace be able to afford the services that we are giving them. So that's how we are looking at it on this policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Kihara. Audience, please feel free to continue asking questions on online. So just type out your question at the end of this moderated session. We will call upon the panelists to answer some of your questions. So just please keep adding the questions onto the comments. We are seeing them and collating them. Moving on now to Nkatha. Nkatha, we have this school of thought from people that, we have very good regulations, enabling environments that we talk about on paper. But then when it comes to enacting them and actually implement regulations and adhering to licensing timelines, there we seem to have a problem. So what is the view from you in terms of the volume of regulation and the potential to actually speed up the enactment and granting of licenses in relation to what we are seeing in this energy policy?
Thanks, George. Now, from a technical perspective, the regulations are required. I don't feel that there's an overregulation in our space because it's a very technical space. We need energy security. We need to ensure that there's grid stability. And our draft energy policy right now identifies numerous regulations that are needed. I think EPRA had identified 32 regulations which are needed to operationalize the Energy Act 2019. This is 2025. 6 years later, we still don't have very many of those regs in place. So they are required, they're needed. And even the policy now has added some more regs and regulations which are needed. But then what we have right now is a spaghetti bowl of sorts of regulations from different regulators. There's no coordination. Some are contradictory to each other. If you look at some of the climate change ones, they contradict with energy. Some of the environmental ones, they all mix up there, and they are confusing for both the financiers and developers to adhere to. So you're never quite sure when you're fully in adherence with all your regs. And then the procurement regime is all over the place. We have each technology now being procured under different technology, under different regime. So we have 5 at the moment. We have the Procurement Act, we have the PPP Act, then we have one for renewable energy auctions for wind and solar. We have another one coming online for geothermal. Then we have the feed-in tariff for the ones which are below 20 megawatts. So it's a bit confusing. It's all over the place. So it would be helpful if all these were streamlined and put into one place for everyone to be able to know exactly what is required of them. And also we are seeing now there's a lot of mix and matching. So you'll have hydro with solar on top. So now would you have to go through 2 different regimes to have the same project? So there's some sort of procurement limbo. I think EPRA has a lot on its plate in terms of getting all these regulations online. Maybe that's why there's some lethargy in this space. If you look at the licensing, it takes up to 10 years to get a project from paper to groundbreaking or even commissioning. That's too long. If you talk to people who are abroad, they have different timelines. They move much faster. We need 15 to 20 approvals depending on the technology. You're talking to 20 different government agencies. It's ridiculous. So we need to, either have a one-stop shop. We've been campaigning for this. I hope someone hears me on this panel, that we have investors coming and getting most of their licensing in one place. Rwanda has it. I think we are not too far behind them. We can figure it out. Then we have also an added layer of county bylaws. So each county has different bylaws, and the project is different depending on which county it is. These county regulations are not available online, so you have to now be on the ground to actually find out, this county needs this, that county needs that. That's also another layer of chaos which has been added to the licensing. And then plus now with the carbon, where you have a renewable energy project which is going to generate carbon credits, there's another layer of now licensing and vetting under the Climate Change Act. So it's a lot. We need to also look at our land issues. Where you have community land or agricultural land, your process is going to go much longer because of licensing. And I was hoping that the policy would address some of these issues a bit more.
Thank you, Katha. I think you're being heard. I see Kiara is really nodding, so he's hearing everything that you're saying. And now I want to move on to Bernard. Bernard, this policy has a lot of language around the handling of planning for electricity generation, regional trade. How do you think we can kind of use this policy, or what we need to do with this policy to enhance the way we plan, to make it more efficient and to ensure that we're actually delivering projects on time? Bernard.
Okay, thank you, George. So in terms of, the markets, I think the policy has all the bits and pieces, but for me, what I like to see, or what's not clear in the policy, is who is responsible for the big picture, or the bird's eye view of the total market and the total system. And then how do we apportion that to the different players? It's very heavy on what the SAGAs will do, but what the private sector will do is not clear. And for example, there's MOE is responsible for the planning together with the KPLC. EPRA is definitely not there, but it provides data for that. And I think it's important that we have one entity. Because actually, believe it or not, we have the open access regulations and all that. Will KPLC as an off-taker and a single off-taker that be happy, or do they have the view of what's happening in the other sectors? Because that's how C&I has grown. Nobody was looking at that, and it just evolved. But for the regional planning, I mean, there is a pipeline of 3,000 projects. This is an excellent opportunity. If there's someone sitting up there looking at what they are doing and where they are, and looking at the entire local market and the regional market that we are looking at, then it would make it much more efficient and easier to coordinate that. Now, the next question is, has whoever taken that responsibility, or, I mean, does that person have the competence and the resource to lead and manage the process? I think I'll leave that for the plenary to discuss, but it's definitely a point of concern. So yes, you're seeing everything, but do you have the capability to process it and execute? I'm not saying the ministry is not able, but the ministry uses most of the SAGAs for implementing what it wants to do. But are the SAGAs prepared to do that? I'm not convinced. Or is there no conflict of interest in them making sure that this is executed? I'm not convinced there's none. Thank you.
And thank you, Bernard. I think you are saying whoever is in charge of the overall picture should be capacitated to actually be able to do or make the decisions that are required as and when they are required. A bit of jargon. SAGAs is the state and government
agencies. Sorry.
Yeah. So this is Kenya Power, KETRACO,
GDC.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Bernard. Now I want to move to Sam Mwangi, and then I want us to touch a bit on the distribution side of this. I know Anzana is involved in distribution in Burundi, serving grid customers directly, and also we've seen the same thing happen in Uganda with Umeme and other concessionaires, distribution companies, and them also now are moving towards rebundling this. Our policy, as always, even within the Energy Act, it has envisioned competition, and most people would say competition to Kenya Power. But generally, it's competition in the retail and distribution segment of the market. And this policy also does the same. If you look at is it 2.2.2 and 0.3, you will see the same language. In Anzana's experience, what do you think are the key elements that would actually enable investors to actualize this desire to have some sort of competition in retail and distribution? What kind of drove you to then do this investment in Burundi?
Thank you, George. So if you look at the policy statement, there is a few areas where it talks about. Of course, there are these three main areas that the policy tackles: the energy access, so providing electricity access to the remaining 25%, and then talks about clean cooking, then it talks about promoting or prioritizing the use of renewable energy. And this is all these three areas are areas where we have a lot of like private sector players who are keen to play a part in all the three areas. So when we focus a little bit on electricity access, the remaining 25%, assuming we are already over 75%, or we are already at 75% access, will tend to be in very rural areas. And the opportunity that you spoke about, which is one of the main projects that Tanzania is working on, is looking to bring the efficiencies of the private sector into the distribution space, into the energy access space. So to look at how you can quickly accelerate access to electricity in a country. I think the goal for this specific project that you spoke about, that Anzana has been working on, is to cover 70% of the population, basically increase the access rate in that country to 70%, which would mean basically providing access to about 9 million people. But then the innovation or the added part of this is to try to do this in a much shorter period. So within a 7-year period that started sometimes last year. But then looking at the policy, and I saw in some of the questions that the participants are asking, there's if you look at the policy, because each how you structure the market is dependent on where you are. So for example, if you are so Kenya is already at 75%. So you probably might not need that specific structure. The structure in Burundi, which is I think around 14% at the moment access rate, or the structure that was used in Uganda 20 years ago, because Umeme is just coming to the end of their concession period. It's not, we are not sort of in the same exact place, but we still have to look at how do we electrify those people who are in the most remote areas. Right from the inception, Anzana was always looking at this aspect of the people in the rural areas are the last to be covered. So there is very minimal infrastructure financing that goes to electrifying people in the rural areas, because there is we don't have a lot of business. We do not have a lot of business case for that, or a way to do that in a profitable way. So it has sort of been left to be done by government, and even in this policy, you see a lot of use of words such as the cross subsidy, which we know is a big part of how the most remote parts are covered. But then in the policy statements, in this policy, in this draft policy, if you look at the section on electricity retail, it makes some fairly good proposals on how to address this, and I think Kiara did not spend a lot of time on that aspect. But there is, for example, looking at how IPPs or generators who are generating power in a certain area could also add distribution of power to people around. And just to mention, that's what Anzana did with all the projects that we developed. We would find like the connection rates to the grid would be less than 15-20%, and so we would usually design a mini grid around it. And the idea was not so much focused on the mini grid, but was to say, if a host community for a 5 megawatt project, it doesn't make sense for you to be the host community and you don't have access to this power. So and our thinking in this was not to kind of take those customers, but because at that time the structure was such that you have to sell all the power to the grid. But if you look at some of the proposals, it seems like one idea is to facilitate development of greenfield projects that support direct retailing and energy trade in local and regional power markets. Those are some things that, if actualized, because then the challenges comes in the implementation, could unlock how we electrify, especially for us with a focus on small hydro, those rural areas where we have big high population, but it's still not, we still don't have a very good business case to extend the grid to those areas. So there are many words I could say on this, but I think key, just to answer your question directly, some of the key areas would be the certain regulatory certainty. So if we've chosen a certain route and we have some regulatory certainty, then that is one thing that can facilitate flow of funds into the electricity access space. There's just the incentives to private mini grid operators, or someone who is looking, for example, to do a distribution concession for a few counties where there is very low electricity access rates. So if there is such things, then we would be able to attract more of or similar projects like what I described. Anzana has been working on. So and of course this regulation to do with open access, wheeling, electricity markets. I think it's so far, I think people are optimistic with the direction it's going. So it's not. So, for example, there could be a thought that maybe this is going to affect the main utility now. But then the way it's being approached, even in this policy document, seems positive, and hopefully that translates to a more system that allows for a bit of competition, both at the bulk level, which is already existing. So that is promoted a bit more, but then at the retail level. So the retail level is where it's going to take a bit of bold steps to actually see it happen, because at the moment it's happening at a very small scale. So the mini grids that are in operations are at very small scale, which makes it a bit difficult to scale. But if you're able to really open up the retail space to competition as envisaged in this policy, the policy statements, then we will see more private capital flowing into that area. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sam. I now want to ask both you and Kihara a question around ancillary services. The draft policy talks about energy storage systems and how these intend to be procured. And you know, for the most part, developers argue that when I'm doing a solar and you ask me to incorporate battery and you do not want to, let's say, adjust the tariff to recognize that, then it becomes unviable for me. At the same time, the draft talks also around captive power and how captive power plants enjoy certain ancillary services from the grid, and the fact that they need to kind of compensate whoever is providing them on the grid for that. We are moving towards kind of an expansion of the scale or the size of captive power projects. And in my view, this will actually have a very significant impact on the captive power developers. Again, I think as Engineer Kiara also mentioned, EPRA is working on an ancillary services market, separate ancillary service market. What do the two of you see as the kind of the link point? Why can't we use this ancillary services market to sort of solve this issue that is sort of being seen on the captive side, and also what is kind of being expected of developers of variable renewable energy plants in terms of asking them to put in battery energy storage? Perhaps we start with Kihara, then we come back to you, Sam.
Thank you very much, George. This of ancillary services is a tricky one because as we speak now, Kenya has been providing these services to the national grid, and they have come to the authority asking for compensation for those services that have been providing, and they are saying, you know, when we had One Kenya Power. Remember before the liberalization of the power sector, then there was no other private generator into it. Now that we have brought in renewable energy generators and they are being supported by their machines, then it becomes a little bit difficult for them to sustain O&M from their side. So they have come to authority to seek how they can be compensated. And that's the reason why the authority now is seeking on how to, how do I put it? Number one, how do you value these ancillary services? How do you remunerate these ancillary services? So it becomes a tricky part. We did the first part of the study, but now the second part is more of modeling and now track the numbers and how this is done. Of course, I know there's a proclamation by ministry that new solar and wind power plants need to bring battery storage. But as we speak now, we also are looking at a regulatory framework on how we can bring standalone battery systems. So George, you'll be able to bring battery system that's embedded to the national grid and provide the ancillary services that are required. So the system operator now will be able to call in whatever kind of ancillary service that they want. Is it frequency control? Is it voltage control? control? Is it giving more energy? Depending on how is it, transmission system also, when it's a constraint, there's other issues that will come in, and then battery storage or any other kind of energy storage will be able to support that. So that's also in the working. So it's not only for solar power plants or wind power plants, but also those will be embedded in the system. It will really help also to integrate more renewable energy, and also coming from the captive power plants. As we speak now, we have the net metering regulations. So anyone who have a captive power plant that is below a megawatt, then they'll be able to sell that power to the national grid. Although there's no exchange of money per se, but there's a kind of a banking, able to bank that energy to the national grid and able to get I think half of that back. And I think that also speaks to what we are saying here about supporting the ancillary services that are provided by the national grid. Because you see, we put 100 kilowatt hours, you don't get 100 kilowatt hours. So these are some of the payment mechanisms that are there. And I think these are some of the things that we are talking about, innovative mechanisms that help us to manage our national grid a little bit better. So I think, I don't know whether I'll be able to answer your question appropriately, but that's how. Thank you.
It's a good attempt. Let's allow Sam to then also give it response.
Yeah. I think, George, and sorry to the audience, we seem to be really using all the big words, but basically for a grid to be stable, there's certain capabilities, and Kiara had mentioned how the large hydros that Kenya has had for many years have been providing this support to the grid to ensure that it's a stable grid. If you read through the policy statement, you'll see, for example, where they mention how small hydro provides this in terms of voltage regulation, that support at the end of long distribution lines. But coming to the concern that George you mentioned, there has been this concern of this thinking that for a captive power project that is tied to the grid, it's getting it's receiving some ancillary services from the grid, and therefore there needs to be some compensation for it. And so in this way, we are kind of viewing the captive power market as a consumer of these ancillary services. But I think the other thing that Kiara is bringing on the table is that they can also be, instead of just being seen as just consuming the ancillary services, they could also provide these ancillary services, because captive generation, which is allowed for in the Act and even in this policy, is where you as a consumer, especially the larger consumers, you put up your own power plant, largely for your own captive use, but then, as Kiara explained, with the possibility to export any or to send any excess to the grid, although that is limited to smaller projects. And in the future, in this open access, then you might also be able to sell that power somewhere else through the grid. So the challenge is, if you only view for example, if I put up a 10 megawatt solar on my system, if you only view it in terms of it's using these ancillary services and therefore they need to pay extra, we might be so focused on that we fail to see the support that it also provides. Because, for example, take out 530 megawatts from the grid today. This is what the captive has been developed on the captive side. If you take 530, we would be in load shedding, right? And therefore, the developers are taking up that risk and putting up the plans and reducing the amount that is required from the grid. And because we foresee, I think the government foresees a lot of a lot of growth in demand. We also need to grow supply, and that supply cannot only be built through adding more IPPs. So it has to be both IPPs, but also having consumers put up power plants where it makes sense. I think the main concern that, George, you are raising, although you are trying to be very, very kind, is if we keep loading that cost, it's the same as if Nairobi County decides we need to be paid an extra amount for wheelies, that has to go somewhere. That amount has to go somewhere. It has to go to the final tariff. And so it's kind of the same even with the captive. We have to be careful with how that ends up being. Of course, we're not saying that it should not be considered, but we also have to be careful not to kill that which has solved a problem that is there. Because I think the alternative would be that the main utility is then required to meet a certain service level. Because part of the reason why people are having to invest in the captive plants is because also of the quality of service that they are receiving. So in very many words, I think we can view these captive plants not just as consuming the ancillary services, but as plants that can potentially provide those. And I know people are wondering what that means, but basically, if I'm putting up my own captive power plant, I can choose to add solar depending on how the ancillary services market is. Or if I can choose to go with a baseload captive plant, of course, recognizing that the variable renewables have a lot of flexibility. So you can do you're able to do solar and wind in very many areas compared to elsewhere. Thank you, George.
Thanks. I think, Bernard, you also have a comment on this one. Just make it quick. We want to now go to the audience.
Yes, I have a comment, and I think I'd like to, in this case, support what Kihara is saying. In the traditional grids, we had sufficient system inertia. So there was capacity which was baseload to cover in terms of supporting the grid. And in modern grids, a bit technical, we are looking at grid forming, which is supporting the grid. And this is resources that help, regulate voltage frequency for the systems, even on an island mode. Now, that's grid forming. We have grid following, which, they are external to the system, but they support voltage frequency. Now, I think the captive power plants and renewable energy systems, what's happening now is ESS systems are recommended, and ESS systems can provide both grid forming and grid following. But those costs should actually be borne by whoever is building the plant. So if my C&I needs to be an island at some point, which is what it should be if it's going to provide the quality of power that I need or that is needed by the user, then I need to provide that service. So it is only that the system or the process of licensing this system did not consider that in advance. It should be mandatory, but the cost should be covered, because then it makes the system integration easier, both for the renewable energy system and the grid, and of course, those building the power plant. So here, I might beg to differ, but that's the fact, the technical fact. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bernard. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Kihara, Gatha. I think now we will cut this session and go into the audience questions. There's quite a number of questions that have been asked. For our audience, those who are not very technical, apologies for all the jargon you've had. Now it's your turn to actually ask what exactly they were meaning when they're using all this jargon. We'll go to the first in order of when it was asked. There's a question from Simon Gidai. What happens to projects in development as we transition to auctions in renewables? And he still asks, what happens to renewable projects under development in relation to operationalization of the auction, I believe. Auctions, yes. I think, Kihara, you can take that.
Sure. I'll do that. And in the project that we are developing, we want to come up with a transition mechanism, and especially for projects, depending on the level of development for that project. We know there are projects that are quite advanced. They have finalized on feasibility studies and everything. Some have already signed or they have initial PPAs. So depending on the level, and others are really starting on their feasibility studies. And depending on the level they are, then we'll be able to classify them and see where do they really fit. But at the same time, we're also having a discussion internally, and we most likely come out to the public and check is whether we can be able to run a pilot project, a pilot auction for those projects that are already in the transition phase. So that's what we are looking at the moment. We'll be able to share this later on when this is totally agreed upon. Thank you.
Thank you, Kihara. I hope you answered Simon. Then we will move to the next question from Sharon Kathakaburu. Can an IPP be licensed to sell power locally and directly to consumers? Is there such a policy? I think that's still Kihara.
You see, currently, as we talk now, before maybe the policy comes on board, is that if you have a power plant that is 10 megawatts, and you have contracted the whole 10 megawatts to Kenya Power, then you don't have excess energy you'll be able to sell to any other person in that case. But if, for example, it has happened also, KTDA currently, they're building their small hydropower plants, mainly to power their factories, and then the extra energy that they have, they're able to sell to Kenya Power. So the PPA is structured such that it's the extra energy that they are getting that they're able to sell to Kenya Power. So it doesn't mean entirely that it's not possible. It's totally possible, and that's what we are looking on moving forward, where you can be able to generate. And another example is Strathmore University. They have solar power plant, and they are able to sell the excess power in a form of a PPA to Kenya Power. So it's the structure of the PPA that really matters here. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you, Kihara. We go to the next one. This is more a comment up to 10 years. I think this was in reference to the comment from Katha around the length that it takes to develop projects. This is coming from Daisy. Then we also have another one, Engineer Bukachi, our former colleague. Is it possible that the policy is over-prescriptive and hence unnecessarily long? When the policy should give overarching aspirational statements, the other details could remain in investment prospectus and strategies. So he's asking, are we just putting a lot of unnecessary kind of information on the policy that we could pack in the other perspective and strategy?
Maybe George, I can come in before my colleagues come on this. This is something that we really discuss, and it's good to hear my former colleague, and it's also my partner in energy, Bukachi, bring it on, because it's something that we have really discussed as we develop this policy. Sometimes, you see, when you're developing a policy, we have so many people on board, and some may be looking at it at very perspective. But what we are looking at as a policy level is try to be as broad as possible to cover as much as possible. And then government is able to do other things, for example, prepare strategies and plans to be able to implement those policy statements. And also remember, for us to be able to do some things in the policy, we need to do some regulations, maybe need to amend the act to be able to actualize some of these things. So the policy is a very good document when you look at it a broader way, and then you're able to do other things at an activity level. Thank you. But it is also good to hear from Nkanda. Yeah.
Yes.
I think from a policy perspective, it should be overarching. When you look at especially the schedules behind the implementation timelines, I think some of them are a bit, can I say, unattainable. For instance, to have the renewable energy auctions in place within a year, I doubt it's going to be possible, especially considering how many laws need to be amended and policies need to be changed to include it. even if it's on a pilot level. So I don't think they should have, put the timelines in the way that they did. It should have just been very broad, like this is the direction we want to go, and then have these timelines and, other prescriptive things in other documents.
Thank you, Gatha. Sam, Bernard, do you have a quick comment on the same?
Yeah, I mean, my only comment is I agree with Bukachi to an extent, because the detail is actually much more complicated and needs some feedback. So the policy document is an aspiration. The details of how it's to be done will be sorted out between the parties involved. So those annexes technically should not be visible to all of us, because we'll start making comments that might bog everyone down. But yes, I mean, it's what is the message? Where do we want to be? What's our aspiration? That's where the policy document should stop at. Maybe give wide timelines, which again, as you've stated at the beginning, will be revised within 5 years. I mean, because I'm wondering, for example, 500 million or 500 billion for transmission? Where is it coming from? You start asking questions that you really don't need to at this point.
It's 12 billion over the next 10 years. Let's move on quickly to the next one. Muturi Kamau asked, thank you for the insightful perspectives on the policy. I would like to hear from the panelists on emerging issues, particularly the challenges surrounding land acquisition, resettlement, and compensation for large-scale energy projects, especially on community land, registered community land, where power brokers often come from within the community. How can we effectively navigate these dynamics while balancing realistic expectations from both the community and project developers? I think that one will be taken between Katha and Sam. I would like to hear your views on that. Katha first.
Well, speaking as a legal representative of various developers, the land has plagued us since we started developing projects in Kenya. You're right, Mr. Muturi. This has actually brought some projects to its knees. It's even in one project they had to call on the letter of support because of this exact issue you're talking about. Every time they'd come to compensate the landowners, they'd find a new set of landowners who now claim that they have not been compensated. And I've had conversations with very many IPPs who tell me, why can't you do what Ethiopia does? Just have the government come acquire the land and, when you identify this as land for public use, have it acquired by the government. And I've seen some of the policy indicates that all agencies in the energy sector will have a streamlined mechanism to acquire land, so that you don't have one ministry acquiring land at a more expensive rate than another, one entity actually in the same energy ministry acquiring land at a different rate. But we have to do something about the community land. And unfortunately, most of the projects are in community land areas, and the others are in agricultural land, which is a colonial legislation which has nothing, it should not be in our legislation at the moment. It was supposed to be removed under the land laws. I don't know how it slipped through in 2012. So I don't understand why land, at this point, you should have to go through an LCB board to determine whether or not we need a power project in agricultural land. There should be a way of the government either superseding those or acquiring the land on behalf of energy projects. I don't know what Sam has to say about that.
Yeah, maybe very quickly. I see the aspiration in the policy statement. So basically, the aspiration is for the government to develop and implement a standardized framework for land and well leave acquisition for energy projects. I think this is a no-brainer. Of course, the challenge is how that will be implemented. But basically, if we leave it as it is, the 10 years that Nkatha spoke about for development, 2-3 years you're just buying land and doing LCP consents and doing succession and those things. Of course, there is some things that are far-reaching, but just to mention that this is an area that requires to be. So it's an area that if the government is able to find a way to streamline it a bit more, it could be very helpful for many projects that are failing because of it. So the policy does say something about this. I think we're going to see how that can be managed.
Thank you, Sam. We are almost out of time, but I'll ask the audience to indulge us a bit for another 10 minutes. So we'll try and quickly go through the remaining questions. There are 3 commendations there to Kihara for the presentation from Ibrahim, Edward, and another user from LinkedIn. Then we have a question from John Marvin Ayara Otieno. Implement comprehensive strategies to ensure 100% utilization of geothermal energy in the coast region. I commend the development of the Green Hydrogen Initiative to facilitate the utilization of excess geothermal currently being invented at night. There is need to establish support mechanism for industries with captive power generation to maximize utilization of their excess production capacity. I ask that we reform net metering regulations to create economic incentives for industries, and I didn't get the last part. And I think that's more a comment than a question. The next question from a LinkedIn user, I can see the name net metering regulations was gazetted. How have we seen any project or developer go through the process and acquire a net metering license? I think Kiara, we can quickly answer that. They scroll on the next one.
Yes. I'll try to answer that, and also a question from Patience Karanja. I think they are related. On net metering, yes, they were gazetted last year in June 2024. Unfortunately, I don't think we have any that has signed a contract with Kenya Power on net metering. We are currently working with Kenya Power because Kenya Power is the main implementer of these regulations, and we are monitoring that as the regulator. They're working with them to have an implementation framework. So the regulator recent, I think this January, we received that. So this work ongoing, and we are trying to see whether we can be able to get one contract signed as soon as possible. But it's also good to say that already Kenya Power has allowed SOS in Mombasa and another, I think UN. It's a building in UN that are able to put power into the grid, but without any remuneration. Net metering is helping that to do that remuneration. And Patience is asking whether they are. Let me ask this question. Where are we regarding net metering? I think our funds are that. On open access, the authority has already developed these regulations. They are in the tail end of implementation. They have been shared with the minister, and very soon we will have this gazetted. Then the last question is within the policy, is there aspect of youth aspiring and gender inclusion? Yes, there is. Unfortunately, I was not able to cover that in this policy and this presentation. But please, Patience, please look at it, and if there's any comment, please share with us so that we can improve on the policy. But it's already there on youth and gender inclusion. Thank you.
I think quickly, there's a question from Julius Kilonzi on the issue of energy security. How do we balance to avoid over-reliance on our neighbors, which poses a risk, but also a benefit if the cost of power is lower than the cost from in-country generation projects? Do we prioritize security over affordability? And then maybe a related one, when would PPA hold be released, particularly for small hydros? I think the question here is the moratorium. Maybe I can read a few actually. There's still another one from Luis Boscan. Is there a clear and agreed vision for what market design is desired for Kenya? Maybe you can take those ones as we come to okay, there's actually only one more, so let me just read all of it. Patience continues to ask on the things that you've mentioned, are there any timelines for the net metering implementation? You can give a timeline. I think quickly respond to those, then we'll come towards the end of the session now. Thank you, audience. Please keep asking the questions. Even if we don't get a chance to answer it now, we will direct it and probably give you feedback from the right person in the panel. Kiara.
Yeah, let me start with Louis, my friend from, I know he's Jenny from Copenhagen. the market design, we have not really agreed upon, and I don't think we'll be able to do that on the policy level, because market design is something that we really need to have quite a big discussion on its own as a strategy, as a country. So we have not really said that what kind of market design that we'll be able to do. But it's something that it's ongoing, having a discussion and seeing what is the best suited for the country. And the good thing is that we have agreed on the electricity market as a policy moving forward as a country. Thank you. And then for patients on the issue of timelines, I may not be able to do that. It's a discussion that we are currently having with Kenya Power to make sure this accessibility, we want to have this implemented as soon as possible. Of course, there's always what we call a resistance to change, so we are working on that to see if this is implemented as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe just one last one. Ideally, there's a user who's asking, ideally policy should guide the development of laws with the goal and objectives in the policy document informing the creation of new laws. However, in Kenya's case, the Energy Act 2019 was enacted before the policy was developed. Given this, are there plans to amend the act to align it with the aspirations outlined in the draft policy? Perhaps maybe just some perspective from Nkatha, comment on that, then maybe Kiara, a small comment on that.
Largely, the Energy Act of 2019 was based on the energy policy of 2018 and the Constitution 2010. So it was overhauling the entire energy regime. So yes, if there is any required changes under this policy, the new policy, then you will see some amendments to the Energy Act 2019, but not as much as we had in the first time, 2019.
Yeah, a quick comment. Are we going to amend the Energy Act?
Okay, I missed what Nkatha said, but what happens is that the policy is the one that guides what that is anything that need to be amended to be able to implement the policy itself. So looking at the policy and now going to public participation, we will see what parts of the act that need to be amended. Remember, and I think I didn't mention this, is that we want to make this a sessional paper, so we are taking it to the cabinet and make it the parliament to make it a sessional paper. So we after public participation, we are also going to do a lot of lobbying with the parliamentarians and the political class to have them understand what you have contained in the policy, and if there's any need of amending the act, then they have an understanding why we really need to amend the act. But as you said, the policy is what guides what really need to be amended. Thank you.
Thank you, Kihara. Thank you, panelists. One quick and burning question for Nkatha. In the policy they mentioned around the government support measures, but just in passing, do you think there's actually a need for us to do like some specific policy statement on what support measures would be giving developers the letters of support, the legal opinion, standardizing them, and making it a bit easier? What's your view on this? And just give me a response in about a minute as we come to a close.
Okay, so currently we're using the 2018 GSM policy. That's probably why they didn't mention much about the GSM, the government support measures in this draft energy policy. And I know that there's a feeling from the government that they want to move away from entitlement by the developers and financiers, that every time you have a project, you will get a letter of support. There's an argument that we are a mature market for energy projects. There are so many going on at the moment, so we should be winning the developers off the letters of support. But that said, we have seen the risks covered in one letter of support and another letter of support are very different. And where developers wait for this letter of support, you have like a chicken and egg problem, because you find some of the licenses are expiring, the land leases become too short, bankable, as they're waiting for the letter of support. So now the project becomes more unviable as they're waiting for the letter of support. So I have seen some private developers, some private organizations, multilateral organizations are trying to come up with a hybrid. I don't know how far they'll get along with that. Something that has the backing of the government in the background, but in the meantime is a credit enhancement mechanism, which is not very, very expensive. I don't know whether that will work, whether that will appease the market. But we have said that for there to be an energy auction, these templates need to be prepared so that at bidding, when everyone's coming to bid at the energy auction, you know that the template letter of support, the template government, the template AG's opinion, what it will look like, and it's not going to be very negotiable. So that will assist in making the auctions a bit more competitive. That's all I'd say for now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Katha. Thank you, Sam, Bernard, Engineer Kihara. Thank you for this session. I know it has been a long one and many questions and still many questions to be answered after this. Audience, feel free to channel your questions again to the association through our social media pages or directly to us. You can DM us and we will get your questions answered and maybe even directly to the right place. The presentation from Engineer Kihara will be made available. Apologies for the few technical hitches that we had at the beginning. We will have this available on our LinkedIn channel. You can actually download it directly. The recording for this session will also be available online. And also a bit of advertisement. The association is having a CNI conference and exhibition on the 16th and 17th of April coming month. Looking forward to see a lot of you attend. We'll have more conversations regarding this policy and a few other things that affect the sector. For now, I'd like to thank our panelists, probably give them 30 seconds each to just give a closing statement as we then wrap up, starting with Bernard, then Sam.
Okay. I think it's been a good engagement. We didn't answer all the questions, but I think the policy also considered energy security, which was raised. The thing is, we've covered it in different under power trade and power procurement, but overall, I think for the electricity sector, the policy intentions are good. We need to now go backstage together with the ministry, the private sector, to now work the details and the budgets that are highlighted there. Eventually, we will end up with a good product. It shouldn't be left to the ministry like it's very heavy on the document as it is the implementation plan.
Thank you, Bernard. Sam?
Yeah, thank you, George. Thank you, audience, for this. I will echo the statements by Bernard. The aspirations are good. Implementing those is where the work will be, of course. And as Kiara said, the stakeholder engagement going on. So hopefully as many people can give their views on this. Yeah, thank you.
We then move on to Katha. Katha, give us your closing remarks.
I'd like to thank you, Kihara, for your presentation, and George for hosting us so well, and for all my fellow panelists. I really enjoyed the discussions. I hope to have more conversations around the energy policy, especially on the draft energy policy, especially with regard to harmonization of procurement. I think that's really big from a legal perspective, because we're in some sort of regulatory limbo at the moment. And also simplification of the licensing processes. Something has to change. And also if we can get a waiver on land control board consent for energy projects, that's a win for everyone.
I'm sure your clients will be very happy about your closing remarks. Kihara, your closing remarks? You're on mute. You're on mute, Kihara.
Thank you very much, George, for hosting us. And thank you, Katha, Sam, and Bernard for a very engaging and an enlightening conversation. Of course, the reason we came here is because we want to make the policy better. We cannot say we are the only one who understand these things. No. In fact, I think you understand more than we do. So this is just a conversation, starting the conversation. We hope to get more and more comments. In Canada, I'm looking forward to your written comments so that we can see how we include them in the policy. And to the audience, thank you very much for joining. Please share your comments. Go to the website for the ministry, download download the policy document itself, read it. Please share your comments with us. And wherever you are, Kisumu, Mombasa, Eldoret, Nyeri, Nairobi, and Garissa, please join us. This week we shall have public participation. Team members are coming down, coming to the ground and having a conversation with you. We want to hear how we can make energy and the whole thing about energy better for our country. And thank you very much. Let's continue with this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kihara. Our audience, we've come to the end of our session. This is one of our series of knowledge sharing sessions. We'll have another one next month, so look out to our social media pages. We'll announce what it will be about. And if you have an idea of what you think you want to hear from, we can organize a panel. So please feel free also to suggest certain topics that you might want to be covered within this knowledge sharing series. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of the evening. And looking forward to get and see you commenting on the energy policy as Engineer Kihara has mentioned. Santeni sana, have a good rest of the evening.